Playbook here at Vesper Tavern at Newark Terminal C. And today we're brought to by Only What You Need. It's a plant-based protein drink, and I highly recommend it. And I highly recommend you listen to my guest this week, Hall of Fame running back Curtis Martin. And Curtis, thanks so much for coming out to the airport today. I know it's not the easiest thing to come to an airport when you're not flying, but we try to make it as comfortable as possible.
Yeah, well, anything for you. I still owe getting into the Hall of Fame to you, so.
You know, you have. Everybody, I made the presentation for Curtis at the Hall of Fame meeting all these years ago, and I've told Curtis, I would have had to screw it up for you not to get into the Hall of Fame, and he kept saying I'm responsible for him getting in the Hall of Fame, which is just absolute. I appreciate it, but it's ridiculous.
Not quite responsible, but I think you had a lot to do with it.
Okay, yeah. Well, I had nothing to do with it. Yeah, responsible would be much too strong, but at the time that Curtis retired, he was the 4th leading rusher in NFL history. Since that time, Frank Gore has passed you by, but being 5th is not so bad.
Yeah. I'm happy for him. Yeah, I mean, he's a good guy.
And the players that you've been behind are Emmitt Smith, the all-time leading rusher, Walter Payton, and Barry Sanders, which is not a bad group.
Yeah.
Jim Brown's in the rearview mirror.
Yeah.
Which I know you're close with him. You play chess with him.
Yeah, it's my chess partner.
I know just from talking to you over the years that you're not a guy that will sit home on Sunday afternoons and watch football, but have you been paying attention to this season? And specifically, everybody seems to be talking about how running backs have become devalued over the years, that there's not as much a reliance on them. But I always feel that when it comes right down to it, you got to be able to run the ball and you got to be able to play defense, no matter what era you're in. What are your thoughts about that?
I agree. I think that the running back position has become more of a running back by committee type thing. When I was playing, you played every single down, every single play for the most part. But now, they're rotating 2, 3, 4 running backs in there. So it's kind of changed the game for the running back.
How do you, if you were playing today, I mean, they wouldn't do that with you. They don't necessarily do that with Ezekiel Elliott, Saquon. They don't do that with Le'Veon Bell. Gets almost all the snaps. You were a guy that never wanted to come off the field. So if your coach, even early in your career, wanted to rotate you, how do you think you would have?
Oh no, I had a total objection to that. I believe the difference in today's game is that it doesn't seem as though the durability is there, and it seems like running backs are much more injury prone, and I think that has been a part of the devaluing of running backs. Back when I played, again, we were very durable. We went years without missing games, things like that. And the game has changed from that standpoint.
Which guys do you look at today and say, that's my kind of running back? That he might not run like you, but maybe he has the Curtis Martin mentality.
Saquon Barkley is one of my favorite running backs. I really like Saquon Barkley. I think that if you were building a running back, that's what you would build, is Saquon Barkley. I think Le'Veon Bell. I actually think New York has the 2 best running backs in the league for the most part. I like Todd Gurley. I like the guy from Minnesota. There's
Cook.
Cook, but Saquon and Le'Veon are my 2 favorites.
This has not been a typical Le'Veon Bell season.
Yeah.
We haven't even seen him be able to really put into motion his very patient running style that he had in Pittsburgh when he was playing behind always one of the best offensive lines in the league. I know you're close with him.
Yes.
Has he expressed any frustration to you? Because in the locker room, all he talks about, I just want to win. I don't care how many carries, how many yards. But you have to imagine a guy who was on a career path to the Hall of Fame and now is having a really rough season. It's got to be somewhat frustrating.
The good thing is that that'll be corrected. One of the things that people don't realize is if 1 or 2 people are missing their blocks, it totally changes the game. When he played in Pittsburgh, they got pushed on the line, so he didn't even have to start making moves until he was a yard or 2 down the field. Now he's in situations where as soon as he gets the ball, he has to start making moves, and it'll totally change the style of a running back. And so I think he's adjusting. I think they're adjusting to him, but I think they'll get it right.
So get a couple more pieces on the offensive line.
Yeah.
Maybe the passing game becomes a little bit more of a threat than it is now, and it'll open things up for the.
If you look at what teams are doing, all they're doing is making sure that Le'Veon can't run. You know, and as long as he can't run, they're saying beat us passing, and that's what I would do if I was a defense, to be honest with you, because Le'Veon is one of the greatest threats in the NFL.
So for those who are not aware, Curtis is one of those guys that made an easy transition from the football field to the business world.
Yeah.
What's that been like? I know every time I try to reach you, you're either out of town or about to walk into a meeting or in the middle of a meeting. What are some of the things that you're doing?
I'm into several different fields. You know, for me, I played football to be able to do business. And I felt like the better I did on the field and the more I kept my nose clean and just had a good reputation. You know, I always tell people I came into the NFL with two goals. Number one was that a coach or no one would ever have to tell me to work harder. That was and I feel like if I did that one thing, it would take care of everything else. And number two, I wanted to finish my career with a name that was more valuable than whatever I made while I was in the NFL. And so for me, I've always been thinking about the businesses and post-career and what I was going to do afterward. And I had already started putting things in place long before I retired. And now I feel as though I'm doing what I really want to do. Football, it was a means to an end, but it was never something that I just loved.
And if you don't want to be specific, that's okay with the names of companies, whatever. But what kind of, are you just all over the place in terms of different interests?
So,
or?
yeah, just to give you an understanding of how varied my portfolio is, I'm into biotech, I'm into fiber optics, I'm into insurance, I have a tech company. I'm kind of all over the place when it comes to, I have an apparel company. There's a lot that I'm doing, and I have a great team around me, and I'm able to delegate things, and it enables me to be involved with several things without being spread too thin.
I do have to say, knowing you as well as I do, that when you listed the two priorities for football,
Yes.
you skipped number one.
What's that?
You wanted to buy your mom a house.
Oh yeah. Well, I didn't know that I would even make it into the NFL, so I didn't know that I would be able to buy my mother a house. And when I came into the NFL, I wasn't making a lot of money. I was making close to minimum. And the first thing that I did with my minimum check was to go buy my mother a house. I felt like if I didn't make it in the NFL, at least I had a place to stay and my mother had a place to stay.
You always hear players talking about that, and I think that's one of the great things about you and other players, that you really do try to take care of your family, especially if you come up from an upbringing that wasn't, lavish by any stretch of the imagination.
Well, mine was far from lavish.
I know. We'll get to that in a little bit, but I mean, things that Warwick Dunn is doing, buying houses for moms with kids, it's really shines a nice light on a lot of players, and giving back is so important.
Yeah, unfortunately, all the good that a lot of the players do is not talked about as much as the small percentage of the bad that happens in the NFL and in professional sports. And those things seem to overshadow all the good that a lot of the players are doing.
I know when we take a break in a little bit, there'll be a lot of people that are going to want to meet you, but you have always talked about how the fame of football and like you mentioned before, it was a means to an end. And when your first year of eligibility for the Hall of Fame, you fell just a little bit short, you were okay with it. It was like, this isn't what my life is about.
Right.
But then I know when you made it the second year, you were as happy as any player I've ever seen, which was great. What has been the difference by when you sign your autograph, you write HOF, and has it opened any doors for you in the business world, in your charitable work? What is just being one of the 300 or so people in the Hall of Fame, what has that meant to you?
Well, the Hall of Fame, it hasn't done as much for my business career or my charitable or philanthropic efforts. It hasn't done a whole lot for that. What it's personally done for me is that it's given me a sense of fulfillment because, again, I only played football because it enabled me to help other people. My goal was to use it to impact people's lives for the better. And the fact that I did something that I really didn't like too much and that I really didn't want to do to a Hall of Fame level, you know, that just, it gave me a great sense of pride just on principle that I did something that I didn't want to do, that I overachieved to the best of my ability.
And then I know you've been going back just about every year since you were inducted, and there's some players that get inducted, then you never see them again.
Yeah.
So you've gotten involved, I think, in some committees at the Hall of Fame, and you've taken it seriously. And I know the person that presented you, Bill Parcells, was a mentor for you.
Yes.
You played for New England, and you signed as a free agent with the Jets. Give me your best Parcells story from your rookie year, before you realized, like, I'm really good at this and I can make it in this league. What did he do to build you up? What did he do to keep your head on straight?
Well, I guess one of my interesting Parcells stories is that we were in camp, and at this time I was probably the third or fourth string running back. And whenever he would talk to me, I would just say, Coach, I'm just going to be patient. When I get my chance, you'll see what I can do. You know, and as time went on, I kept saying the same thing. Well, one day he comes to me and he says, hey kid, the gig is up on you. I didn't know what that meant. I said, well, what does the gig is up mean? He said, I'm gonna put you in there and I'm gonna see if you can back up all those things that you've been saying. And so he puts me in camp and we're scrimmaging against each other. So the offense is going against the defense like it's a real game.
Right.
And we're on the goal line. And he says, you need to score, and I'm going to tell them where we're running the ball, and you have to jump over the top. So, I mean, the whole defense knows where we're running. They know I'm getting the ball, and they know what side I'm going. So Parcells would yell out before the play and say, we're running, you know, counter 34 to the right. And he'd tell me, you have to score. We did it 8 times in a row. The first 5 times they stopped me, and the next 3 times I scored every time. And after that, he told me that he gained such a respect for me because not one time did I say it was unfair, that I put my head down when I didn't, you know, succeed. He said, you just kept pushing, and at the end of the day, the last 3 times you scored. And so I think he gained a lot of respect for me, just my personality and my mentality.
Was it physically painful?
Yes, yes. I mean, literally, you jump up in the air, and these guys get to run from like 10 yards back, and the rules weren't like they are today. Like today, you can't hit someone helmet to helmet. Back then, you could just tee off on someone. And so, but the more pain I was in, the more feisty and tenacious I became, and I think that's why I scored the last 3 times. I'm one of those type of people, when you keep denying me and you tell me I can't do something, it's like that dog comes out of me and I turn into a different person.
And you're telling me not once in those 8 times did you think, I'm breaking this around the right side? I'm not going up the middle?
I couldn't. In my mind, I was going to score all 8 times, you know, even though I knew that it was impossible, but eventually I got there.
Did he talk to you at all after 4 and say, don't give up?
No, he just kept telling me, he said, you ready to quit? You ready to quit? Every time, you know, after the 3rd time, he kept asking me if I was ready to quit. I was like, Coach, I'll never quit. I was like, I don't care. They're going to have to carry me off here for me to quit. Yeah.
And when did he start calling you Boy Wonder?
After the first game of the season. So eventually after that, that's where I started catching his eye. And so he started putting me in more. Eventually, by the time the season started, he said, I'm going to trust you, and you're going to be the starting running back for our first game against Cleveland. And we're playing the game. It comes down to we're down by like 5 points. We need a touchdown, and we're on the 2-yard line. And just like he had me going over the top and goal line, he tells me, you remember what we did in camp? I need you to do that right now, because this was literally like 16 seconds left in the game. We either win or we don't if I score. And I ended up scoring and won the game as a rookie, and that was really big, and all the press was around me. And he came to my locker while they were all interviewing me, and they said, don't put him in the Hall of Fame. And he said, don't put him in the Hall of Fame yet. He's only a 1-game wonder. And my goal was that he would call me a 2-game wonder, a 3-game wonder, and so on. And eventually it just became Boy Wonder. So that's how I developed that nickname.
And you liked that too, didn't you?
Yeah. It was because for him it was like his underhanded way of giving me a compliment.
Yeah.
So I appreciated it. He's not the type to give compliments.
No, I am aware of that, and most players who played for him are aware of that too.
Yeah.
So after 3 years, you signed as a restricted free agent with the Jets. When he went from the Patriots to the Jets, that was one of the first things he did was bring you with him.
Yeah.
But New England went on to have incredible success starting in 2001, which is still pretty much the middle of your career. Has it ever crossed your mind what would have happened if you had stayed in New England, if the things went, everything else stayed the same, Belichick comes in, he drafts Brady, and certainly they had that success without you, they would have had that success with you. And do you ever think about what would have happened if you had stayed and how many Super Bowl rings you might have had?
Yeah, and I think the math is simple. I think I would have won more Super Bowls, but I would have had less fun doing it. I think that I probably wouldn't have met my wife. I wouldn't have the kids that I have because I've done all that in New York. And so I appreciate the fact that I wasn't there, because so much more than Super Bowls have happened in my life. Things that I'm much more proud of than the Super Bowl.
Do you think if he had stayed in New England that you would have stayed also, or might there have been another team?
If he stayed there, that's the only reason why I left. I would have never left New England if it wasn't for Parcells leaving. Yeah.
What would you say that?
I would have even taken much less
Really?
to stay in New England if Parcells was still there.
When you had Parcells and Belichick on the same staff there for a few years, did it ever cross you? I mean, you knew what a great coach Parcells was, and Belichick was just working with the defense, but obviously you saw what he did with your defense. Did you ever sit back in the moment and think about, I got two of the greatest coaches in NFL history?
Well, no, everyone on the team recognized that, because we already considered Parcells one of the greatest coaches in the NFL. But everyone on the defense, they would always come out of their meetings like they just went to a rock concert or something. And they would say, like, Belichick is a genius. He's just on a different level. He might not be better than Bill, but he's smarter than Bill. And so I think Bill Parcells, his quality was that he knew how to get the best out of you. He knew how to lead a team. Bill Belichick, he knew how to outsmart any opponent. And he was just like a football savant.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But even so, nobody could have anticipated he goes to New England in his first 20 seasons there. He goes to 9 Super Bowls and wins 6 of them, and that's never going to happen again.
Yeah, I don't think it'll ever happen again, because they have such a great combination of a good owner, a good head coach, and one of the top quarterbacks, probably the greatest quarterback of all time. It's hard to put those 3 things together.
All right, let me ask you a couple quick questions here. Who's your favorite teammate?
It's like 1A and 1B between Vinny Testaverde and Chad Pennington.
And you try to right down the middle with your 2 quarterbacks there.
No, those are both my guys.
Yeah.
Gerald Soule is probably my closest friend, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the favorite moment of your career?
Favorite moment of my career?
Yeah, whether it was a run or a game or a team accomplishment.
It was actually the Fog Bowl when we played the Pittsburgh Steelers up in New England.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that game, because I'm from Pittsburgh, and if you're from Pittsburgh, like everyone is a Steeler fan. I was probably one of the very few who wasn't. And all of my friends, all of my family, they were talking so much crap before that game because whoever won that game was probably going to go to the Super Bowl.
Right.
And to be able to destroy all of their hopes was just like the greatest thing in the world for me.
Favorite running back for you to watch during your career and maybe now?
Barry Sanders.
Yeah.
Barry Sanders is by far the most exciting, dynamic back that I've ever seen. I mean, some of the things, it's almost like now that I box, I do a lot of boxing. So I'm able to appreciate little techniques that boxers use. Like I can look at a Floyd Mayweather and see why he's undefeated in 50-0, or Muhammad Ali, and appreciate why they were so good. But playing running back, I know those little nuances that are so hard to do, and Barry Sanders was able to do those things without even thinking about it. And so I think he's the greatest running back of all time.
And then you already said Saquon is a guy you like
Today, I think Saquon is the closest thing to Barry Sanders. Yeah, I think he's the modern day Barry Sanders.
Okay. So we're here with Pre-Flight Playbook at Vesper Tavern at Newark Airport Terminal C, and today we're brought to you by OWN, Only What You Need. It's a plant-based protein drink, and once again my guest is Curtis Martin. Curtis, we've talked a lot about your career and how you got to this point, Hall of Famer, successful businessman, and your growing up story is one of the most compelling that I've ever heard. Your Hall of Fame speech I think impacted a lot of people when they heard, where you came from and what you overcame to get to where you are today. And just tell me the story about how your mom wanted you to play football or just have an after-school activity to keep you off the streets because you had seen so much by the time you were 15, and she wanted to make sure that you lived a long and happy and healthy life.
Yeah, so by the time I was 15, I had almost been killed several times. My senior year in high school, my childhood best friend, someone from a mistaken identity, jumps out of a car and shoots him in the chest with a shotgun. He runs about 50 yards and collapses and dies. And my mother said to me, look, you've almost died so many times, all your friends are getting killed or they're in jail or something like that. You need to do something. I don't care what it is. Just do something after school. And football just happened to be the thing that I was most natural at doing, but I didn't want to do that. But I didn't want to play baseball because it was in the summer and it was too hot. So football just became something I did by default.
And your coach, who you mentioned in your Hall of Fame speech, was very instrumental also in getting you to come out for the team.
Yeah, he was actually the head football coach and the phys ed coach for the school. And so from the time I entered high school, he was asking me to play for the team. And I just kept saying, no, I don't have any interest in football. I don't like playing football. It's cool to do in gym class, but I don't want to do it in an organized way. And my senior year was when my mother and him were both kind of from this air and that air, and I just decided that let me do this because it could possibly save my life because I don't need to be around this neighborhood with all the killings that were going on.
I can't imagine what it must have been like for you to see so many awful things at such a young age and what impact that had on your life and maybe how it's shaped you into the man that you've become.
I've had some horrible things. Like, my grandmother was like my mother, and you know about this. She was my mother, basically, and we found her murdered, like lying in the bed with a knife in her chest and a broken neck and eyes wide open and all that. And several of my friends, I've had family members. I mean, I'm talking about gruesome, horrible deaths. My aunt, who was like my third mother, she was burned to death. I've just seen some gruesome, horrible things, but I wouldn't really, other than the pain of them and the fact that people's dying, I wouldn't change one thing. I mean, of course, I would want them to be living, but just the impact that it's had on me, there's something about when you learn to overcome adversity, especially traumatic things like what I've had to go through. It builds something in you, and it forges something in you that helps you to be more resilient as you mature and as you grow in life. And it's what makes life so good for me now, is that it's difficult for problems or situations to really shake me. There's a part of me that feels somewhat unshakable because basically of all the hell that I've been through.
I would have to think at the top of that list of things that help shape you, and I'll let you tell the story. And I've heard you tell this several times about, I don't remember how old you were when some guy pointed a gun and pulled the trigger 7 times.
Yeah,
and So go ahead and tell that story.
I was 15 years old when a guy put a gun in my head.
Now, why did he do that?
That's a lot more detail that I would rather talk about. But but anyways, he puts a gun to my head and he pulls the trigger. And you know, I hope I'm not offending anyone, but he says, "Nigga, you dead." And he pulls the trigger, click, 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 and no bullet comes out. And he puts it on this, click, 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 at least 7, 8 times, no bullet comes out. And then the one time he pulled the trigger when he didn't have the gun against my head, the bullet just came out. And I tell you, it is literally life-changing when you feel a loaded gun click against your head. When you feel that thump against your head and you know that your life is about to end, it totally rearranges your priorities and the way you view life.
And after the 7 times it was empty and then he shot it for the 8th time, did he just leave, or how did you get out of that situation?
Yeah, again, those are details that I don't, you know,
we'll
probably wouldn't want to talk about. But I mean, in a different situation, yeah, I might talk about it, but in this, no.
Okay, well, let me just say, suffice to say, I'm happy that you're sitting here next to me.
I'm grateful I'm here, I'll put it that way.
Okay. You have said that you're inspired by your own past, and that you're grateful for where you are today because of where you came from.
Yeah.
What does that mean, that you're inspired by your own past?
I'm inspired by having overcome such difficult circumstances, because I think that a lot of times people in my situations, rightfully so, use these things as an excuse. I've had every excuse in the world to not succeed, to not thrive, to not move forward, but I've just chosen not to use them. And just to see the result of persevering and being resilient and keep fighting, because that's my message to a lot of people who are in very similar situations. I don't meet too many people who have gone through like the hell that I've gone through. And so as a result of that, I'm able to kind of lead them and help them out of the turmoil that they may be going through. And for me, it was worth it. If I can save, I mean, there's been countless lives. There's people, very famous people, I mean, so many people who will call me on the verge of suicide. And I'm able to connect with them in a very quick moment and talk them out of doing something that they won't even have the ability to regret.
Why do you think they've picked you to I mean, I would know the answer to this, but why do you think they've chosen you as kind of a voice of reason to try to set them straight somewhat? I mean, you have a great reputation, obviously, and I would think it would be gratifying that, obviously you don't want the people to be in that situation they have to call you in the first place, but the fact that you're able to help them straighten out their own lives.
Well, you know, some things just happen, and I think other times people are looking, especially when people are in situations like that, they're looking for someone to talk to. It's just that they don't trust anyone. And I found that people tend to trust me because they know what I've been through.
Right.
And I had someone call me and tell me that they were about to go kill 3 people and then kill themselves. And I was able to not only talk them out of that, but now that person is like a very influential guy. He's been going to church. His whole life is totally different now. It is for me, you couldn't give me a Super Bowl that means more to me than that, because the 3 guys who he was talking about killing, you have to consider they have kids, mothers and daughters and sisters and all, because not only are you saving those 3 guys' lives, but you're saving everyone else's life around them, because it's going to be a drastic change. And most people don't consider the impact, the ripple effect of actions like that. And I'm able to bring them, give them some very straight talk, and it comes from a place where they know that I know what I'm talking about.
You've done some work also with, and these are the stories that people don't know about Curtis, but with homeless people, that
Yeah.
you've tried to at least get them to go into a shelter rather than sleeping on the street.
Yeah, I partnered with Mayor Bloomberg back when he was in office, and we had this initiative to decrease homelessness by 2/3 by 2009. And there was this one guy, his name was Cowboy. They had been trying to get him out of the streets. He was homeless for 38 years. And they told me about him, and they said, but we don't even mess with him anymore. I said, well, I want to find out where he's at. So they located him. I went, this is dead of winter. It's probably about 20 degrees outside, snowing. And I sat on his little stoop with him for about 2.5 hours talking to him. By the time I was finished, I said, listen, I'm not here to tell you to do anything. I would like to offer this to you. If you're willing, great. If not, it was just a pleasure meeting you. And when I got up to go, he said, Kurt, I want to come with you. And one of the coolest things was, a couple of months later, because he went through our program, he called me and he says, Curtis, I got my own living room, man. I got my own living room. And that was just such a gratifying moment for me.
You talked earlier in the program, I had asked you about buying your mom a house. You have such a special relationship with her, and the things you went through together, all the unfortunate things that happened, and now you being in the position that you're in now, you've taken such wonderful care of her to make sure she's living comfortably in a nice house and doesn't have anything to worry about. Just talk about how that relationship evolved and where you're at today with your mom.
So with my mother, again, I grew up in a house with an extremely abusive father. So as a 4 or 5-year-old, I was used to seeing my mother get beat like a man. My mother would go to work with sunglasses on because she had a black eye. And to be able to, help her, my mother became such a bitter woman. The way she was abused on a daily basis. And as a 4 and 5 and 6-year-old, I was constantly in protection mode. And I think it has a lot to do with how I am today towards a woman. I have the utmost respect for women now. And I'm more of a protector, because I've seen that abuse, and not only with my mother, but in those communities, you see a lot of that type of abuse. And so to be able to not only help my mother in that situation, but to get her to forgive my father, I always tell everyone that was my greatest accomplishment.
Let's switch for the last segment here to, and Curtis's story is just so compelling that I'm surprised nobody has made a movie about your life yet.
I've gotten a lot of offers. I just don't want to do it right now.
I bet it's just amazing. But let's just talk about the future of football.
Yeah.
Concussions and how dangerous the game is. What are your thoughts about where this is going, and football having provided such a tremendous forum for you to get to where you are today in life? Is this a concern on your part that parents just aren't going to let their kids play anymore because it's become so dangerous?
Well, I don't think that it's because it's become so dangerous. In my opinion, if you're running around and you're hitting heads to head, some things are going to happen. But I just think that it's bigger than what it actually is to the guys who are on the field. I'm not downplaying it, but I think that what you gain through the game of football, the lessons you learn, the values you learn. See, my mother didn't know how to teach me how to be a man, because she's a woman. My father wasn't there. Football was like a third parent to me. The lessons and the values that I learned through football, they have guided me and will guide me for the rest of my life. I would do football all over again, not because I like playing it, but just because of what I was able to learn. I wouldn't trade it for the world. And I just think that there's so much in the game of football that outweighs the potential danger.
What was your thoughts about the incident with Myles Garrett of the Browns and Mason Rudolph when Garrett hit him over the head? Obviously, there's no place in football for that.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts the first time you saw that?
I mean, I thought that it was unfortunate because the way things like that play out in the game of football or on national TV is that, you got to figure there's approximately 150, 200 plays in an NFL game, and you have 16 of those games, you have 16 teams playing every week. So there's thousands and hundreds of thousands of plays, and then you'll have one play like that, and that play will become such a stigma on the game of football, such a black eye on the game of football. So I thought it was unfortunate from that standpoint because from the commissioner, Roger Goodell, on down, everyone is trying to make this game safer and form more of a brotherhood. But when you see a situation like that, that kind of outweighs all the good that everyone had been doing.
Do people not understand, and this is no way condoning or making excuses for Myles Garrett, but do people underestimate what an emotional game it is?
It's a very emotional game, and you're playing, and you have to play with such a sense of pride and such a tenacity, you know what I mean? But what you learn as a professional is how to keep that tenacity and that pride under control.
Right.
And every once in a while, you see someone lose that control, And but for the most part, that's a once a season, if that type of incident.
I'm going to finish up with this question, and this always kind of intrigues me. When John Madden was inducted into the Hall of Fame, during his speech, he says that he's convinced when they turn the lights out at night, all the busts talk to each other.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever heard him say that.
Yeah.
Okay. So the Curtis Martin bust that's been in the Hall for, what was it, 2012 or 13 you got it?
2012.
Okay, so it's been there 7 years. Your bust has had a chance to look around the room at over 300 people. What's the one bust or what's the one person in the Hall of Fame that you'd want to have a conversation with, just the two of you? I know you love to play chess, sitting and playing chess and having a conversation, or just having a meal with. Who's that one person that's in the Hall of Fame that's really intriguing to you?
Well, two people. One of them, I've had conversations with both of them, but the one that I've spent the most time with is Jim Brown.
Right.
We'll sit outside by his pool out in Hollywood, California, and play chess for about 7 hours straight. And we have those conversations. And Jim is what, 82, 83 now? And he's been in that industry of entertainment since, I don't know, what, 1950, 60 something, whatever. To be able to gain the wisdom that comes from him is probably one of the most profound conversations. Another guy would be Roger Staubach. I like both of those guys, and they're much older guys, but I appreciate the wisdom that comes from guys like that.
In 7 hours of playing chess with Jim Brown, how many games do you get in?
In 7 hours, we probably play about 10 games. Yeah.
And how's your record against him?
He'll probably he's probably up like 6-4. Out of every 10 games, he beats me maybe 60%. Yeah.
Do you compare eras when he talks about what it was like playing in the 60s and whatnot in the 50s, compared to when you played in the 90s?
Yeah. And what's interesting is that back then in the 60s when they were playing, it was much more racial tension than it is now. I mean, now it seems like there's a resurgence of racial tension in society, but Jim talks often how he was playing with that in mind. Very much in the same way that I didn't really want to play football, but I was playing football because I knew that it would be a vehicle and it would enable me to touch so many lives and help so many people. In the same way, Jim was looking at football from a racial standpoint back then because it was such a prevalent topic.
And one of Curtis's records that really bears mentioning, and he was a young man when he did this, but he was the oldest running back in the NFL at the age of 31, to lead the league in rushing. And you had almost 1,700 yards that season, which was your career high.
Yes.
And to me, it's just amazing because running backs usually kind of fade out after 4 or 5 years. And if it wasn't for your knee injury the following year, you might have just kept on going.
Yeah.
But that has to be a record that you're really proud of. And maybe it's going to be a while before somebody is older than you were that season that leads the league in rushing.
Yeah, you know something, for me, if you look at the first 6 years of my career, that was one thing. What I wanted to do was have my latter years be better than those first 6 years. I was gauging I would probably play around 12 years. I said, well, the second 6 years have to be better than the first. And I was on track to do that. And just one little freak injury ruined ended my career. But I felt better than I had ever felt during my entire career going into the latter part of my career.
And I'll just end with this. If we can project 5 years from now, are you an NFL owner?
Yes. I feel very confident because I'm right on the cuffs right now, and I've had so many great opportunities that I've passed on for some reason or another, but I just think it's an inevitable thing that's going to come to pass, and I've just learned to not be in a rush for it because that's a lifetime type of decision. You know, you don't get to own or be a part of a part of owning an NFL team, but so many times. And so when I do it, I want to make sure it's the right place, it's the right situation, and it's the right team. And I'm looking forward to it, but I'm not in a rush to do it anymore.
Will you be a hands-on owner, or?
Very much so.
Yeah.
I think that I'll be one of the few owners who have the opportunity to see in the game from the ground up, literally. I'm talking about from the bottom of the pile of the ground. From there, I've done a whole lot of business, and I built myself up to be in a position to own a team or to be part owner in a team. And so I will literally have a perspective that I don't think any other owners have.
And I would imagine if among the people out here who are watching us, if there were some Jet fans in the crowd, I think that they would get the car out front of Newark Airport, drive you to Florham Park, help you contact all your business partners, and put a check on the table to try to change the ownership of the Jets.
If Woody and those guys would sell a team, I'd have a check for them tomorrow. If they would, but I doubt that they would ever sell a team.
Well, like I said, I think there's some Jet fans that would probably embrace the thought of you owning the team and maybe ending this half-century drought of not being in the Super Bowl.
Well, I mean, like I say, I don't think that'll ever happen, but maybe it'll happen somewhere else.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for watching. Following last week of Roger Goodell and to follow it up with Curtis Martin, it was a tough act to follow, but if anybody can do it, Curtis can, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you're about to get on an airplane, have a very safe flight. I hope you learn something about Curtis because he's got a lot of great life lessons to teach. So this has been Pre-Flight Playbook, again from Vesper Tavern here at Terminal C at Newark Airport. And Curtis, thank you so much for stopping by.
Well, thanks for having me, Gary.